Number 5. Ghosts and the Men in Black. Our first story comes to us from the internet's front page and a very reputable trusted news source, Reddit. A thread was posted asking Redditors, those who've encountered a cryptid, what happened? Now, it's worth a click through, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but our first story comes to us from a user, Amazing Banana. He describes being at a park with his partner, stargazing and enjoying the night. The park was smack dab in the middle between a little suburb and on the other side, some dense foresty area. As the two were sitting and cherishing the moment, making precious memories, our storyteller heard something coming out of the woods that sounded like somebody stomping around. Concerned about something suspicious happening, he looked up to try and see what was going on. He described seeing something walking around, hunched over and walking on 4 legs, wearing what looked like a white cloth over it. Naturally, he was pretty confused, so he asked his partner to describe the same creature as she looked at it, saying it also looked like something draped in a cloth. Scared and confused, the pair took off to their car to take off and leave behind whatever they'd seen. From here on, the two of them went out to another park to collect their bearings and saw a strange black, unidentified flying object that looked like a helicopter, but the OP said it didn't look like any vehicle he had ever seen before, describing it looking more like one of the vehicles from Avatar or Halo Reach. He said it flew in a way unlike anything he had ever seen. So what exactly was this? Was this a UAP and an extraterrestrial that they encountered in the park? Or perhaps, and this is just speculation on my end, could that have been a cryptid they saw, and the vehicle he saw afterwards was some sort of special government vehicle sent in to collect the sample? Black helicopters and the Men in Black, that kind of deal. The creature described could be something called a kune-kune, a Japanese urban legend of a cryptid that manifests itself as a thin, white sheet like a floating ghost. Now, the OP never specified where the post was coming from, so who's to say? We may never know. If you like cryptid videos and you like UAP videos, I have got boxes of cryptid and UAP videos. Just check them out on the channel, and hey, toss a subscribe if you're feeling generous. Number 4. The Enfield Horror. Enfield, Illinois was supposed to be just another calm, regular old Midwestern town. Sadly for the residents, it would be plagued by cryptid sightings, its most famous being the one named after the town, the Enfield Horror. The Enfield Horror was described as a short, squat beast with 3 legs, 2 small arms, and bright eyes like flashlights, standing a bit under 5 feet tall. It has leathery, wretched skin and is not the kind of thing you ever want to see. The first spotting of the creature was in 1973 by one Henry McDaniel, a local Enfield resident. One night at around 9:30, McDaniel and his wife returned home to their children, telling them they'd seen something scratching on the door. Later in the evening, McDaniel heard something scratching at the door as well. He went out to see what it was, expecting to see just a neighborhood dog, but instead was greeted by the entity now known colloquially as the Enfield Horror. McDaniel fired at the monster and claims he did hit it, but the beast shrugged it off and hissed back at him, and then bounded away in long leaps across the yard. He reported it to the police, who came to investigate, and they didn't help too much, but what they found was concerning. 6-toed footprints and patterns in a 3-footprint pattern. And later that day, there was another report of someone else being jumped by a creature that seemed remarkably similar to the creature described by McDaniel. And this is far from the only 2 sightings of the Enfield Horror. After this initial encounter, sightings popped up pretty frequently around Enfield. No one ever found the Enfield Horror, and whatever it was has never been confirmed. So it could still be out there. Number 3. Wolfman. Of all the monsters out there, especially like the Universal monsters, my all-time favorite are probably werewolves. I don't really know why, just absolutely loved them. I used to draw them in my homework as a kid all the time. I really wanted to be a werewolf. I was bizarrely obsessed with them, so I'm a sucker for anything about them. Take a listen to this story here. A reporter on BuzzFeed asked the BuzzFeed community if anybody had any interactions with cryptids, and this story shared had me howling. That's a little wolf pun for you. Okay, sorry, let's get into it. One night when there was a blood moon, I decided to try and get some good pictures and went to a secluded spot just outside of town. Pulling in, I noticed a tree had fallen by a nearby creek, right about where you'd park your car to fish. I started setting up my scope and camera, and I heard a lot of rustling around the brush. Coyotes are common enough, and I had my pistol on my hip, so I didn't pay it much mind. The rustling soon became more akin to something violently chasing through the woods. At this point, I stopped what I was doing and shined a light to try and see what it was, but I couldn't see anything. I was off-put by the sounds, so I started to pack in my stuff to leave when I heard some splashing. I turned on my light and I drew my gun, flashing it, and then I saw it. This 6-foot tall thing with what looked like the face of a wolf, but was too big to be a wolf or a coyote. It was as tall as I was. As the light hit it, it growled and charged at me. It barreled forward and disappeared into the cornfield. I left all of my stuff behind, and I came back the next day to find a farmer and some sheriffs. The farmer's sheep had been eaten the night before, so he'd been setting up trail cams and came across all of my things. I told them about what I saw, and they told me it was just a bear. But the tracks were definitely not a bear. Could that have been just a bear, and in a flash of fear and panic, he mistook it for a cryptid? Or could this have been a werewolf sighting? And he should have brought some silver bullets. Number 2, a ningin. A ningin is a cryptid I'd never heard of before, but after reading about it, I was instantly fascinated by it. It's described as a humongous, blubbery, whale-like creature, but there's a lot of variations on the creature depending on who's telling the story. Sometimes it's depicted as being kinda cute, to be honest. It looks a bit like a seal, beluga, or a dolphin. And sometimes it takes on a more humanoid, terrifying shape, kinda like a merman sort of deal. Interestingly, ningin is a Japanese word for human, implying that it should be more humanoid in description. It's described as being anywhere from 20 to 30 meters long, oof. And sometimes it's described as having a mermaid-like tail. Other times, having hands and hind legs. Basically, one of the few recurrences across all the legends is that it's got ghastly pale, white, blubbery skin, and is described as having a very blank face, with black eyes being one of the only notable features. They're first described around the 20th century, with most sightings of them occurring around the 2010s. There was a possible sighting in 2006 when people said that they found evidence of a ningin swimming under ice on Google Earth, but from satellite photos, it can be a bit difficult to ascertain if that's actually what's going on. Still, reports and stories of this thing keep popping up, so it could still be out there. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Chupacabra. The Chupacabra is one of the most famous cryptids out there. Its name translates to goat sucker, and depending on the tale, the Chupacabra comes in many forms. Most often, it's described as being a quadrupedal, canid-like monster. But some depictions also describe it as being bipedal and more humanoid in appearance, and some of the really out there descriptions make it out to be like a little alien goblin looking thing. Over the years, there have been several reports of people who claim to have seen the Chupacabra, and even people who claim that they've felled the legendary beast. Most of these sightings though get attributed to coyotes with mange, which give off a sickly appearance and definitely do look demonic. Time and time again, the Chupacabra is debunked as just an urban legend or a misunderstanding, but goats keep going missing, goats keep getting found with all their blood drained, so what's going on? It's spotted all throughout Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the southwestern United States, always propping up around livestock being drained of blood. So are there really a species of souped up super predator dogs out there? Recently, and maybe you've seen this weird photo going around, a strange bipedal furry-like creature caught international attention online when it was picked up by a trail cam just outside of a Texan zoo. Now there are some who claim that it could just be someone wearing a costume, but it looks a little too spindly for that. As well, skeptics raise that it could just be a coyote standing on its hind legs, which would make sense, but it does look a bit alien. It doesn't really have the stature of a coyote. I'm gonna be honest, if it looks like anything, it looks the most like it's Crash Bandicoot than it does a person in a costume or a coyote. So could this be the elusive Chupacabra? It's occasionally described as bipedal, and maybe it would explain why it's so elusive if it's able to sneak around like this. I just hope we get some answers on this thing.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Mothman. The legend of the Mothman is a really freaking eerie one. So the Mothman originates from West Virginia folklore. Apparently, it's a large 10-foot tall gray creature with red glowing eyes and wings, and has the ability to fly over 100 miles per hour, so he's pretty damn fast. This creature has been spotted on a number of occasions. In particular, it's believed that once you see him, bad things are going to happen, so he's kinda like an omen. The first report of this creature was on November 15th, 1966. On this night, 2 sets of young couples drove out to Lover's Lane to get frisky in their cars. It was Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallet. That's when one of the couples noticed a massive creature with red glowing eyes watching them from afar. The couple, Roger and Linda, freaked out and sped on out of there, but the Mothman followed their car and tried to attack them. Thankfully, they made it out alright. night, but they were hella spooked and reported their encounter to the police. During the next couple of days, a number of different people reported similar encounters to the police as well. Like 2 volunteer firemen claimed they saw a large bird with red eyes. Then a contractor named Newell Partridge was out in a field at night when he saw the creature in the distance. He shined his light in his eyes and he said they glowed like bicycle reflectors. He then went on to blame this creature for the disappearance of his German Shepherd. So people all around town were hella freaked out. The scariest sighting would have to be in 1967, around the time the Silver Bridge collapsed. Apparently, people who saw the Mothman then went on to receive premonitions of the bridge collapsing and experienced terrible nightmares. And on the day that the bridge actually did collapse, a number of witnesses claimed that they saw the Mothman perched nearby just watching. That's creepy. As long as he doesn't come to Canada though, I'm good. In our 4th spot today we have the red-eyed roadside cryptid. This is the name given to a creature that a man named Britton saw one early morning in Texas. So it was June 20th, 2000 at around 1 a.m. He had just gotten off work and was headed home. Now on the route that he takes, he explained that there's this 90-degree turn and you have to go really slow and be careful because sometimes they find cattle out on the road. So he was making his turn when all of a sudden he saw it. And he knew right away it was not an animal of any sorts. This creature had red eyes and was on 2 feet and had black hair all over its body. So Britton, being the curious man that he was, got out of his truck and shined a flashlight at this creature. That's when the creature raised its arm above its head and let out an ear-piercing scream. It then turned around and ran behind a house. So the man immediately got back in his truck and drove away in disbelief of what he just saw. But according to him, he has heard the scream at night before, but he never knew where it was coming from or who or what was making this noise. After doing research, he found out that this creature he saw is related to the Bigfoot. Sounds like it's Bigfoot's noisy younger cousin. Either way, be careful when driving late at night.
Number 3. Skinwalkers. Now let's shift to one that's not adorable even a little bit. Skinwalkers are an extremely popular cryptid, a person with the ability to shapeshift into any creature they desire. Sometimes the legends state that in order to shapeshift they need to molt out of their skin, and in some legends they have to wear the pelt of the animal they intend to shapeshift into. You know, sometimes skinwalkers are presented as monstrous, sometimes humanoid. The recurring lines through every Skinwalker stories though is that they are absolutely terrifying and under no circumstances should you ever look one in the eyes, as it's said that looking one in the eyes will not only draw its attention but seal your fate. So take a listen to this story from Reddit. This post came to us from a Reddit thread asking, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? And an anonymous Redditor shared this story, and it's probably one of the scariest things I've ever read. Beginning. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up gathering firewood from my grandmother because it was getting dark. We were driving back on a dirt road and I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle shouted, "Don't." My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest, and I heard a tap on the window. My uncle sped up and started praying in our native language. I didn't know what was going on, and I thought it was over until our truck dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. And then I heard it again, tapping from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped. My uncle looked at me and said, "We'll ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." Naturally, other people on Reddit were kind of terrified about that story since it's sending a chill down my spine, and they asked him what he thought it was, and the Redditor said simply that he thought it was possibly a skinwalker. What more is there to say? Number 2. The Flatwood Monster. The Flatwood Monster is another West Virginia native, and I've gotta ask, why are there so many cryptid stories coming out of West Virginia? I've never been there, so maybe somebody can clear this up, because all I know about West Virginia is anything John Denver sang about, and he didn't mention Mothman or the Flatwood Monster, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, the Flatwood Monster is a cryptid that's been thought to be an extraterrestrial in nature. It was reported to be 10 feet tall and roughly 4 feet wide. It's described as wearing some sort of mechanical suit like it's Darth Vader rather than a purely organical being, and its most notable feature is its giant bulbous head with 2 gigantic eyes glowing green. It's got a big cowl in the shape of a spade behind it that makes it look a bit like it's an alien vampire, and its body was thick, armored, and it has small, spindly little arms like a T-Rex. Now, the Flatwood monster's first sighting dates all the way back to 1952, when 3 local boys saw a shining light falling across the sky, eventually hitting the ground nearby at a local farm. The boys returned home to report that they'd seen a UFO crash land and told one of their moms to get a search party going, and honestly, that is exactly what I would do if I ever saw an alien. I would probably still call my mom, to be honest, if I ever saw an alien. From there, they gathered a small search party to go to the farm to approach what they saw. When they reached the top of the hill, they saw a large pulsating ball of fire and smelled a mist that was making their eyes burn. Someone in the search party noticed 2 small lights and flashed his light quickly at them, revealing a creature standing 10 feet tall with glowing green eyes. The creature hissed at them, then glid upwards and head off into the night. What was the Flatwood monster? Some skeptics have speculated that those eyes could have been that of a barn owl, and the face does kind of light up. The shadow was disguising it, so it would make sense. But that begs to ask, what was the mist? And what was the thing that fell from the sky? Was the Flatwood monster an alien? And is it just me, or is the Flatwood monster just the tiniest bit adorable as well? I know it's kind of terrifying, and its bug eyes are gonna haunt my dreams, but does anyone else think it looks a little huggable? It's shaped like a friend? Number 1. Mothman. Mothman is arguably one of the most famous cryptids of all time, and it's captured our heart since he started flapping around in popularity. Mothman's first ever recorded sighting was in 1966 in West Virginia, when 5 men were in a cemetery prepping for a funeral when they saw something bizarre rustling around in the trees nearby, and lifting off was a massive brown-winged creature that disappeared into the night, far too large and unwieldy to be a bird. From there, the legend of the Mothman began to rise. It would get spotted frequently throughout West Virginia and the surrounding states, but its home is West Virginia. 3 days later, after the first sighting of the Mothman, on November 5th, 1966, another sighting occurred. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving with their friends, another couple, Steve and Mary Millette, around midnight. While driving, the couples noticed that amidst the darkness there were glowing eyes that seemed to be hovering around them. They stalled the car a bit, unnerved about who these mysterious eyes could have belonged to, and through the darkness and the headlights of the car, they saw a creature that stood 7 feet tall with leathery wings folded against its back. The creature began to pursue them rapidly, matching the speed of the car at around 100 miles an hour. They tried to turn around to get a better look at the thing, but the creature screeched and flew upwards into the sky when it was hit by its headlights. Now, this would be far from the last sighting of the Mothman. Since these early sightings, Mothman has been reported hundreds of times across West Virginia. He's practically a pillar of the community. I think he's allowed to vote. Some say he's a benevolent figure who wants to help people and warn them of dangers around, whereas others say that he's a more mysterious, nefarious agent, flying around sending people to their doom. There's an allegation that Mothman was involved in the destruction of a bridge in 1967 that led to the death of 40 people. Some survivors claim that they saw the Mothman flying around overhead after the collapse. Whether he's real, a West Virginian legend, a friend or a foe, there's no denying that like a moth to a flame, we're drawn to the story of the Mothman. Number 5. The Loveland Frog. First up on our list is the Loveland Frog, a cryptid that was new to me but is very quickly winning my heart, and maybe he'll steal yours as well. The Loveland Frogman is a mythic humanoid frog that is a legend to the people of Loveland, Ohio, which is where the name comes from. The Frogman is described as a 4-foot bipedal frog, mostly appearing to hide around bodies of water. I mean, it's a frog. Where else is it gonna go? It was first sighted in 1955 by a businessman driving home alone at night. He was headed out towards Branch Hill in Ohio when he saw 3 strange, short, squat, bizarre-looking creatures standing on their hind legs alongside the road. He described them all as being 3 to 4 feet tall with leathery-looking skin and faces just like a frog with giant glowing yellow eyes. The Frogman would go quiet for a bit and wouldn't be seen again until 1972 when a local police officer was driving home and saw an unidentified 4-foot creature running in front of his car's headlights. When he got a good look at it, the officer described it as a leather-skinned bipedal animal crouching like a frog, and it hurriedly ran towards a river. 2 weeks after that sighting, another Loveland police officer reported seeing the same creature, the same little bipedal frog monster. This officer, however, shot at the Frogman and discovered that what he found was a tailless iguana that had grown unusually large. Now, while for some, that was the end of the Frogman legend, there are still sightings and reports to this day. As recent as 2016, people are still claiming that they see the Loveland Frogman. To the people of Loveland, the Frogman is something of a local hero. They love the guy, and I gotta be honest, I sincerely do too. There's something about this cryptid story that's really doing it for me. There's no stories about him eating anybody, the Loveland Frog monster's not attacking anybody, he's just a happy little frog guy scurrying across the roads. I sincerely hope they're out there. And hey, you having fun on the channel? Drop a subscribe for new scary videos every single day, twice a day. Let's keep on going. Number 4. The Fresno nightcrawlers. Up next is the Fresno nightcrawlers, and let me just say right now, these are probably my favorite cryptid on the entire list. If I say another one is, I'm lying. It's these guys. Some cryptids are downright terrifying. Some cryptids will keep you up all night, and maybe these guys will too, but I personally find them downright adorable. These are the Fresno nightcrawlers, bizarre, rail-thin bipedal creatures with no discernible features whatsoever. The only footage we have of them is blurry security camera footage, which doesn't help identify the creatures much at all. They appear short with very, very long legs, almost stilt-like. The first reported sighting of one of the nightcrawlers came from a city in California, Fresno, where the name comes from. A man named Jose was at home late at night with his dog trying to get a good night's sleep, but was repeatedly disturbed by his dog barking at something out the window. He went over to quiet his dogs down and noticed something deeply bizarre on his security camera. He saw a pair of white, elongated creatures strolling down his lawn. The next morning he claims to have seen small footprints all over the lawn. The next sighting of the Nightwalkers was in Carmel, also in California. A former Marine and his wife were driving up a hill, and they claimed that they saw a 7-foot-tall creature that they described as a thin, pale, armless white humanoid walking on by. What are the Nightwalkers? They're weirding me out. Are they aliens? Cryptid? Possessed pair of pants? If anyone's got a line, you let us know immediately. Whatever the Nightwalkers are, all I know is that I love them. I think they are downright adorable. I watched a clip of them walking down the hill like 30 times while I was writing this script, so just know that.
In our third spot, we have the Shuck. The Shuck is a ghostly black dog from East England legends. Don't be fooled though, this dog is anything but cute, cuddly, and friendly. It's got a thirst for blood. Those who have seen it describes it as a big black hound. Some even say it has red or green glowing eyes. Now this ghost dog is said to terrorize rural towns and villages across the country. The most famous as well as most horrifying encounter would be from 1577. One night a bunch of villagers had to seek shelter in a church during a huge thunderstorm. As they were huddled in there, a big black dog burst through the church door and attacked a man and his son. It also knocked down one of the church's pillars, so a part of it actually collapsed. It then ran out of the church, and as it did, it apparently left scorch marks on the wood of the church floor and door. Those marks are apparently still there today. People were horrified by this encounter, and that's how the legend of the Shuck came to life. In our second spot, we have the Green Beach Monster. This is apparently a very strong and scaly, slimy beast that hunts for prey in Ohio rivers. The first encounter happened to a woman named Miss Johnson and her friend. It was August 21st of 1955, and the two ladies were enjoying a swim in a river. One of the ladies was in an inflatable tube, just, relaxing, while Mrs. Johnson swam by. That's when all of a sudden she was dragged underwater. She struggled to free herself, and thankfully she managed to. She resurfaced only to be dragged under again. Thankfully, Miss Johnson managed to free herself once again. She did so by kicking this thing. According to Miss Johnson, the hand that grabbed her was large and hairy and had sharp nails or claws. She also knew that this beast was large and strong just based on the way it grabbed her and pulled her down and held her down. In fact, Miss Johnson was left with multiple bruises and wounds on her leg from this creature. Without this, people probably would have thought that she was just lying. But she had a full-on claw print bruise on her leg. Obviously, the two reported the encounter to the police, and that's when they got a visit from an Air Force colonel. He interviewed them both and took very detailed notes. Before he left, he warned the two women to never mention this encounter ever again. And I mean, that sounds hella suspicious. As if the government had captured this cryptid and then it escaped and they didn't want people to know. So anyway, they should get one of those memory erasers from Men in Black. You know what I'm talking about, the little ksh. And in a number one spot today we have the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a very famous cryptid said to live in the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey. Legend goes that in 1735 a mother gave birth to a child that she did not want. Her and her husband couldn't afford to raise another child. Apparently she had 12 children already, and after she found out she was pregnant again, she cursed the child and said it was a devil child. In fact, one version of the story, apparently she offered her unborn son to the devil. Anyways, she ended up giving birth to the child and all was well and normal. But as days went by, the kid started to transition into this weird creature. It grew hooves, it had a goat's head and bat wings and a forked tail. It would growl and scream. In another version, the mother was actually apparently a witch and the child's father was the devil himself. And that was the creature that they gave birth to. Either way, it's creepy as hell. So there have been reported sightings of this creature as early as the 1820s. Some say it has a horse's head, long claws, and bat-like wings, whereas others say it looks like a kangaroo with wings. In 1909, that's when this creature terrorized New Jersey. Tons of people were apparently seeing this creature. In fact, due to all the sightings, workers were advised to stay home and schools were closed. Just saying that if they thought that this creature was fake, none of that would have happened, so they were scared for a reason. Eventually, the hype around the Jersey Devil died down. That was until 1927. A taxi driver in Salem City was minding his own business when apparently he encountered this beast. The beast was then following the man and was pounding on the roof of his taxi. Hey, I don't know, maybe he just needed a lift. Then in the 1960s, residents were woken up in the middle of the night to strange screaming. They all knew that this was the cries from the Jersey Devil. And in 1980, the Jersey Devil struck again. Officers and forest rangers were called onto a scene at a farm where a bunch of pigs had been killed. Their bodies were all scratched and ripped open, the back of their heads were eaten. But there was no blood on the ground. There's no explanation for what could have done this to the pigs, besides the legendary Jersey Devil.